Hello, everyone. I'm excited that you're all here today. My name is Lisa Schneegans, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of a conservative political tech company, Buzz360. Today, we have Ned Ryun. Ned is a grassroots and conservative activist expert. He's the founder and CEO of American Majority, a nonpartisan political training institute whose mission is to identify and mold the next wave of liberty-minded candidates, grassroots activists, and community leaders. Since the founding in January of 2008, under Ned's leadership, American Majority has trained candidates and activists across all 50 states. We are starting with Ned today, and then I'll wind up with a brief overview of Buzz360 and our new ballot chase feature. Feel free to put questions in your chat, and we'll get to them at the end. Ned, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I started American Majority 15 years ago, really stealing a page from the left and looking at what they had done specifically in Colorado. I would encourage you guys to read the blueprint. I think it's Colorado Blueprint that came out maybe 14 years ago, really explains what the left did at the state and local level to take what was really a deep red, reliably red state and turned it deep blue. And one of the things we noticed that they did is that they went in and they identified and trained and gave good, in their estimation, good men and women to actually have the tools necessary to win school board races, county commission, state legislative. And so what we've done and what we did with American Majority starting in January of 2008 was we needed to do that. We needed an organization on center right that would go out and equip good men and women to go run for school boards and city councils and county commissions and state house, state senate. We've had congressional candidates come through, but the idea being that we will equip people with the tools necessary to be effective in actually winning. I'm a big believer that politics is policy, that unless you win politically, you do not get to implement the right policy. You've got to be in the right place to do that, and that involves winning. So we want to equip people with the tools necessary to win, which leads me into what I want to talk about today. So I told Lisa, usually I do this presentation in about an hour. I'm going to compress it into 40 minutes to leave time for a few questions. And then Lisa's got some stuff that she wants to share. So I want to launch into really what has become an emphasis for American Majority and American Majority Action this year in training and equipping local candidates and activists on what we're calling the ballot out, ballot in approach that I truly believe we need to implement, needs to become second nature by next summer leading into the fall of 24 elections. So I am going to share my screen. This is something that became very apparent to me, especially in the wake of the November 2022 elections, as I kind of sifted through the rubble of what took place and what I thought was going to be a very good election year for those on the right. All the historical data, all of the trends, the polling, everything showed there should have been significant gains in the House, should have taken the Senate. Republicans should have taken the Senate majority, should have been gains at a whole host of levels at the state level, the gubernatorial level. In fact, was not that way at all. And so as I kind of went through kind of an after action report in my own head and put some things together for those around me, it became very apparent to me that we needed to adjust and adapt our thinking, our strategy, our tactics moving forward, or we will continue to lose. Those on the center right, we will continue to lose if we do not acknowledge and accept that a lot of things have changed the last two election cycles. They've completely, utterly changed American politics as we know it. At the same time, there are many aspects of things we used to do well that we've abandoned, which I'm going to walk you through. These things that a lot of state parties in the past used to do have not done so, except for one that stands out as a very good example, and I think a model for us to follow moving forward. That's the Florida GOP, and I'll talk in more detail about that later in this presentation. But I think we have to accept the fact left doesn't necessarily focus on persuasion. Instead, they chase mid to low propensity ballots. They've perfected ballot harvesting, and I want to be clear on this front. There are two forms of harvesting ballots. One is there are absentee ballots that are mailed out. They are in existence. They have been mailed out to people that have requested ballots, and those are collected in what is known as an absentee ballot chase. Ballot harvesting is a little bit different in that the harvesting that takes place can be done in 11 states by those that have no relation to the voter. People knock on a door, collect a ballot, return them. The left has perfected that form of ballot harvesting. I have to tell you, where it is legal, where it is acceptable to do ballot harvesting, I do not think we should shy away from that, not in the short term. And I'm going to also be very clear as we go through. Do I like some of the rules of the game that are being played, how it's being played right now? I do not. But they are the rules of the game, and you cannot change the rules of the game until you actually win the game by the rules that have been laid out. So I say that we on the right better figure out how to play by every rule that has been laid out so we can win the game. And then we can have a conversation about how we change those rules once we have political power. The left has embraced no-fault universal absentee voting. They focused on voter registration. They focused on universal ballot mail-out. In fact, I don't know if many of you are aware, but in Nevada now, according by state law, every registered voter is sent a ballot whether they request it or not. So every registered voter in the state of Nevada is actually sent a ballot, whether they've requested it or not. That's how the state laws work now in Nevada. And I think 2022 really demonstrated that the left's about ballots, not votes per se. They're not about persuading people to vote for them. They're about creating a larger universe of ballots and then collecting as many of those ballots as possible, knowing that if they have created a massive universe of ballots and they collect more than the other side, that'd be us, they're of course going to win. So they don't even bother with the usual persuasion techniques. They didn't even show up and debate, meet with voters. If you look at Pennsylvania, John Fetterman had one debate late in the day, long after early voting and ballots had been mailed out. Josh Shapiro, who was the Democratic gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, didn't debate once. Katie Hobbs in Arizona didn't debate once, because I think they all knew that what they had going on is all they had to do collect all the ballots circulating in their state, and they were going to do a better job of collecting them. So why bother with persuasion? Let's just create a bigger ballot universe and collect more ballots than the other side. So people have asked, what do you think about 2020? I think it was absolutely manipulated. Zuck Bucks, Center for Tech and Civic Life, they even bragged about what they did in fortifying the elections in Time Magazine. I would encourage you, if you've not read that article, I believe it's February of 2021, in which they talk about fortifying the elections to save democracy, which in my mind is Orwellian for we rigged and manipulated to get the results we wanted. However, I think 2022 was different. It was an absolute and utter failure of the right to actually implement outside of Florida real absentee ballot chase programs. We got outworked. We got out hustled by the left. Sure, we can talk about some interesting things that took place in, say, Maricopa County, Arizona. But I'm going to talk in more detail later on about Arizona, that even with Maricopa County happening and them reducing the amount of actual in-person voting locations on election day, if there had been a real ballot chase taking place in Arizona, it wouldn't have mattered. Every Republican on the ticket would have won. So again, why is the left winning? I think the left strategy has become ballot out, ballot in. They realize that if they have enough votes to win, they will have enough votes to win if they can increase their low prop voter universe. What do I mean by that? I hope most of you are familiar with the 4 out of 4, 1 to 4 rating that most people do with voter intensity. 4 out of 4 is super voter, right? They vote in every primary, they vote in every general, they are highly active voters. 3 out of 4, they might miss a primary or two, but they're also very active. 2 out of 4, probably voting in fall general elections every other year. And then the 1 out of 4 are typically presidential only type voters and might not even vote in a presidential primary, but they will vote in a presidential general, but they're very inactive voters. And so what the left is doing and has started to do very successfully is they're going after a lot of these low prop voters, and they are getting them to request ballots because they know that if they can get these low prop voters to request a ballot, then all they have to do is go collect those ballots. So they're trying to increase their universe of ballots to collect them. And we as conservatives, quite frankly, are still focused on persuading voters to vote for us. And I think it's time, as we move into 2024, that we need to create our own machine. We need to create our own absentee ballot machine, because I think right now we're playing a game with both hands tied behind our back. And it's time that we stop doing that for a whole host of reasons. and accept and acknowledge that until you have political power, these are the rules of the game. Play the game by those rules. So politics, game of addition, not subtraction. And I know this sounds very simplistic, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you do not get all of your ballots in, you lose. And what you want to get done doesn't get accomplished. Again, it goes back to what I said earlier. Politics is policy. If you would like to be in the position to implement the right policy, you actually have to make sure you win. And how do we win? Right now, are you going to have a machine in place to actually collect more ballots than the other side? And I think right now, I think some of the mindset is changing center right. I think people are really starting to put real thought, plans, strategies into some of the key states for next year. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done in changing that mentality of we need to change our thinking in regards to not election day, it's election season. Here in Virginia, our elections, our voting starts September 22nd. Ballots will drop that day. There will be early in-person voting sites that will open that day. So election season is 6 weeks in Virginia. I'm not crazy about that. I think we should actually reduce voting to a short number of days, but it is what it is. There will be ballots that drop. They will hit the mailboxes a couple days after. The early in-person voting starts September 22nd, and you will have 6 weeks to get your people to start voting or to return their ballots. And again, it depends on what some of the states. Arizona is about 4 weeks. North Carolina's 8 weeks. They'll drop 60 days out. So, understand that we are now in a time frame in American politics. It's not election day, it's election season. So things have changed. Instead of following the Florida example, again, I'll talk more detail about that. We've been chasing votes instead of ballots. We've been focused too heavily on election day voting. We've actually discouraged our voters from participating in absentee ballots. There's been one person who's been significant in discouraging that in the past, although I think Trump has very much changed his mind on some of this stuff. And then to top it off, we've been severely underperforming with light voter registration and light early voting, get out the vote activities. And by that, I mean, here in Virginia on September 22nd, we will, through American Majority Action, go into direct advocacy with our get out the vote efforts on September 22nd. And those of you that have been involved in Republican politics for a long time, you remember the 72-hour task force. That doesn't exist anymore. That world does not exist. And we have to change our mindset and our mentality and our planning and our strategy and our funding to focus on election season, not election day, not even the last 3 or 4 days, could be up to 6 weeks, 8 weeks if you live in North Carolina when ballots drop. So some of the grassroots activists that we deal with at American Majority, well, I thought we didn't want to vote early. And again, I'm going to repeat this. It's time to play the game by the rules laid out. Might not like the rules. You might resent or question the rules, but you don't get to change the rules until you win the game by the current rules. And so I think we need to actually understand the rules of the game and play the game by those rules. So win the game, change the rules. So I want to be very clear on this. I'm in Virginia. My rules here, my state laws here on ballot collection are different than Minnesota's. Here we have unlimited ballot harvesting. In fact, the church I go to, the pastor will make an announcement as soon as the ballots drop. If you have not returned your ballot, please feel free to return them. Next Sunday when you come, they, of course, have all the ballot security things taken care of. And then they go about 3 or 4 blocks and return them to the proper location. But there is no limit here in Virginia in which someone or an entity that is not related to the voter can actually collect ballots. I know that's not the case in Minnesota. So I encourage people, you've got to look up your own laws, follow them exactly. Secretary of State should have a website where you can look them up. And a great resource for a lot of these state laws in regards to ballot harvesting, ballot collecting, all these things, ballotpedia.org. If you're not familiar with that site, I would encourage you. It's a great resource on a whole host of fronts, a whole host of issues. But according to ballotpedia.org, there's 25 states in DC that allow ballot harvesting on some level. Of those 25 plus DC, there's 11 that allow pure ballot harvesting. And there's 46 states that allow early voting. So I would encourage you, go look at your laws, understand them, and understand the rules of the game. So here I am in Virginia. Early voting starts 45 days prior to election day. In person or absentee by mail, the ballots drop. They'll be out in the field, call it 42 days. And that's when your chase begins. I'll explain what that chase looks like. Anyone who's registered voter can apply for an absentee ballot for any reason up to 12 days before the election here in Virginia. Ballot harvesting is legal. Anyone chosen by the voter may return the ballot. So look up your laws for your specific state and follow them exactly. So we stress that here in Virginia in regards to the early person and ballot and harvesting as well. Now, when I was sifting through the rubble of 2022, think about that night. There were a lot of races that I think we thought we were going to win. And then you look at Florida, and there was a very definitive win by Ron DeSantis in the gubernatorial. I would remind people in 2018, he won by the narrowest of margins, literally tenths of a percentage of a point in 2018. And then he wins by almost 20. And I would argue, obviously, Charlie Crist was a retread. He was a very tired, kind of terrible candidate. Ron DeSantis should have won by 10 points. He ends up winning by almost 20. Why was that? Well, the Florida GOP has truly figured out how to do an absentee ballot, a very robust absentee ballot chase program over the last 6 weeks of an election. And I do believe because they continued on against a weak opponent, they doubled the score, right? They ran it up to about a 20-point win. And I have to tell you, you'll see a few more statistics I'll share. I don't think Florida is a battleground state in 2024. I think that ship has sailed. I think Florida in many ways is off the map for being a battleground state. So I think it's time for us on the right to focus on a far more holistic approach that reflects what the Florida GOP has been doing, quite frankly, for decades. So why were conservatives able to win overwhelming majority of statewide races since 2020 in Florida, in a state that until very recently was a majority liberal registration? And the answer is a robust, well-funded absentee ballot chase program, also a robust voter registration program, and also some absentee ballot generation programs as well. But they invested the time and the effort to get to where they are today to, I truly believe, take Florida off the battleground status. So it's the brightest success story in the country. And that's why I tell, as we've trained in dozens of states again this year, look at Florida. If you want to understand what the path forward looks like for us and what we should be doing, I think you look at the Florida GOP's model and say, this is something that we should implement as the state laws allow us to in our states, in our respective states. Because the Florida GOP used every lever at their disposal to reach voters on the right. And they bank 3 out of 4 and 4 out of 4 voters. They chase low propensity conservative voters. They put a significant amount of money into voter registration. They're putting a significant amount of money into absentee ballot generation. And by that, I mean going after people that they think might be low propensity voters that should be voting for a Republican. But the easiest way to get that vote is to get them to request a ballot, and then they can go collect it. So the Florida case study, since 2010, Republicans have won 21 out of 24 statewide elections in a state where Democrats outnumbered Republicans until the last few years. And if you look on the one side of the screen where it says the partisan gap, 2018, there were 257,000 more registered Democrats in Florida than Republicans. In a year that Ron DeSantis and Rick Scott won the gubernatorial and U.S. Senate races, albeit by very narrow margins, but they still won. The partisan gap shrunk in 2020 to 97,000. It flipped entirely in 2022 to now 383,000 more registered Republicans inside the state. And then the partisan gap, this was actually as of April or May of this year. I think the gap has gotten even bigger. I think it's over 500,000 now, registered Republicans over Democrats. Again, how does this happen? They decided they're going to spend time and money to do robust, continual voter registration as part of their absentee ballot chase generation and chase program. So what did they do? They decided we're going to do absentee ballot chase program. Florida GOP, give or take a little bit, spends about $10 million over 6 weeks, essentially chasing 1.1 to 1.3 million absentee ballots. They spend a lot of money and time on absentee ballot chasing, on early voting, on election day. They do all of the above. Their ballot chase begins the minute ballots drop 6 weeks out, and they continue pushing and pushing and pushing and chasing and harassing. And people have asked me, you know, if you were to define what an absentee ballot chase program looks like, you know the universe. You know who has requested and sent an absentee ballot, so you have that universe in front of you. And again, in Florida, it's 1.1 to 1.3 million. In Arizona, for example, it's 1 million, I think 67,000 people currently, Republicans, who are on that permanent ballot list. So you know who they are, you know they're getting a ballot. And once those ballots drop, it really becomes a series of harassments, peer-to-peer texts, postcards, live calls. Once early in-person voting starts inside of a state, it becomes layered in with live door knocks until you can get no less than 80% of the ballots that are out in the universe back in and collected as votes. And so a ballot chase program is understanding your universe, which is easy to find out, and then doing a series of targeted contacts, again, through a variety of things, whether it's text, mail, doors, live calls, to get people to return their ballot. And once they return their ballot, the list changes. So once that person has returned their ballot, they drop off the chase list. That list gets refined. The next day, the list gets even smaller as more and more people return their ballots, until you start to narrow it down, till you get to no less than 80%. I believe in 2022, it's either 2020 or 2022, the Florida GOP achieved over 81% return on the ballots that they were chasing. That is the goal. To understand, you've got to get to that point, and I'll talk more about Arizona. But if Arizona had gotten to 77%, they would have won the gubernatorial, they would have won the U.S. Senate, they would have won everything in 2022. But they only had a 65% return, and so in fact lost everything. Now, what does it look like? Robust absentee ballot chase program. You want to do voter registration to grow the base. You want to get low propensity voters to request absentee ballots. You want to chase the ballots the moment they drop. Again, Virginia, it's 6 weeks out. North Carolina, 8 weeks out. Arizona, it's 4 weeks out. And you continue that chase all the way up until the deadline. And again, by state, it differs. In Florida, I think it's 3 days before election day, ballots have to be in. In Arizona, it's 7 p.m. on election day that ballots have to be returned to be counted. And also, it's doing heavy get out the vote the moment early voting starts, and heavy get out the vote on election day. Again, going back to what I said earlier, this is about election season, not election day. It is essential that we continue to build our base of support leading into next year. I have seen statistics, although it fluctuates at times, but newly registered voters, they can turn out around 80% in their upcoming election year. So they can act as pretty much as super voters. It becomes incumbent upon us to think about how, in some of these states that were lost by very narrow margins in 2020, how do you go register people to get them ready for 2024? And then if you can, get them to get a ballot, so you know they actually have a ballot, so you can then chase them. Also, part of it is re-registering a voter when they come into the state. Party change, address change, name change has the same impact on likelihood to turn out. So if somebody moves into a state, getting them to re-register inside of that state. I truly believe it can tip the balance of power in battleground districts, battleground states. I would remind people in 2020, it was about 43,000 votes total between Georgia, Arizona, and Wisconsin that really decided the presidential. Those are pretty narrow, razor-thin margins when you look at what took place in 2020. It was not, some people want to say that Biden won convincingly. He did not. If those 3 states had gone into Trump's column, would have gone to the U.S. House of Representatives, where the Republicans would have won, would have voted in Donald Trump for a second term. So all these little things start to add up. So if you can go in and register, say 20 or 30,000 new voters in Arizona, or 20 or 30,000 new voters in Nevada, Wisconsin, Georgia, all these things start to add up, and then you conduct a real absentee ballot chase program, you can start to see all of these things start to snowball in the right direction. One of the other things too that we've been dealing with at American Majority is some of these activists that want to, I'm only going to vote on election day. Well, do you like your candidate? Well, yeah, of course I like my candidate. I'm voting for that candidate. Well, why don't you save that campaign money and vote early? And they ask, well, why? Well, because until you vote, they're going to be hitting you with texts. They'll probably be calling you. They'll probably be hitting you with door knocks, maybe mail pieces. You will save your candidate up to 4 times the amount of money by voting early and taking yourself off of that list for them to pursue, so they can spend those resources on other people who they need to get to the polls. So if you want to save your candidate and the campaign that you like and are supporting money, vote early, bank the vote, and get yourself off that list so they can focus their resources on other people. So Again, huge amounts of donations spent on TV, radio, direct mail each election cycle. Registered voters remain on the rolls for years to come without additional cost. So it can be expensive. If you are going to do a robust voter registration effort that's not organic, that you're spending a lot of money on, it can be $30 to $40 per registered voter, confirmed new registered voter. So upfront, it can be expensive, but you put somebody on the voter registry, on the voter rolls, they're going to be on the voter rolls for numerous election cycles to come. So it can be expensive upfront, but it can be a very good investment down the road. So again, these are some numbers from beginning of the year in regards to the difference in voter registration, partisan registration in some of these key states for 2024. We're actually playing in Louisiana gubernatorial this year with American Majority Action. We're actually doing some field testing on absentee ballot generation and Chase. But you look at some of these states, I mean, Arizona should never have been lost by Republicans in 2020 or 2022. Nevada still down 80,000. Pennsylvania, it's not quite 540. I think it's 400 and something now. Louisiana obviously is down on Republicans. North Carolina. So people have asked, how do you do voter registration? It depends if you've got the money, how much money you might have. So when do you do it? I say in an election year, summer to registration deadline, voter registration deadline. It gets people a sense of urgency. Hey, you've got to get registered before the deadline, and you do it close enough to that deadline and to the election that it's still fresh on their mind. What is the rough cost? Again, organic versus paid. You can actually do pretty cheap peer-to-peer texting programs to get people registered to vote. You can do some of this stuff relatively inexpensively. But again, if you're going to do a fully robust voter registration effort, it's probably $30 to $40 for a registration. If you want to do it organically, people have asked, well, where should I do them? Obviously, gun shows, churches, if the church will allow it. You go and do voter registration where you think like-minded people are that should be registered to vote to get them onto the voter rolls. And so some of these states, obviously, DC, Virginia, Arizona, any voter who gets registered to vote joins a permanent absentee voting list. Although I will tell you, after 2024, Arizona is changing its laws. But up until 2024, anybody that gets registered to vote will be put on that permanent absentee voting list, and they will get a ballot. So it makes sense in some of these states, try to get more and more people registered to vote. So it's time to get to work. If we don't, we're going to keep losing. Identify presidential election only voters, identify other low propensity, conservative, unlikely voters, and push them to get on a ballot list. Use peer-to-peer texting, social media ads, live phone calls to push for absentee ballot requests. That's some of the stuff that we're doing in Virginia and Louisiana right now. And it's going to be interesting. Actually, I think we're going to have some pretty interesting studies that we'll be sharing with the greater public in getting people in Louisiana that have never requested an absentee ballot before, have never voted absentee ballot, obviously, never requested a ballot, and targeting that universe to see what is the percentage of return. Right now, it's about 14% of people that have never requested, obviously never voted by absentee ballot. And in Louisiana, you have to be 65 years or older to have no excuse absentee ballot requests. So kind of some interesting studies that we're doing right now in the field to kind of prove some things for 2024. So the plan, who, and then the how. So once you know the who, and again, in a lot of states, it's the absentee ballot, who requested them. You can acquire that. You can then know who actually requested a ballot. And then you've got to tell them the how. Don't assume people know the rules of the road regarding absentee and early voting. That's some of the stuff that we do at American Majority Action in the summer, is we're educating people on what they can and can't do in regards to absentee ballot request generation, absentee ballot voting, early voting, all of these things. And then don't assume that supporters, if you're a candidate, understand the value of voting early that it has on your campaign. Like I mentioned early, it can save campaigns by a factor of 4 money by getting supporters to go to the polls early, to vote as soon as early in-person voting starts, because then people are not spending all that money on texting and live calls and door knocks. So in some states like North Carolina, very easy to track your ballots. Once you've sent your ballot in, you're able to track it to make sure it's been received, been counted. A lot of different resources. Another example, we did some spring election work. Sadly, the Supreme Court race in Wisconsin did not go well. But, in Wisconsin, you can get absentee data applications. So those that were submitted for the spring 2023 primary, after January 1st to February 3rd, it was about 44,704 people. It only costs $250 to request and receive that list. So it's out there. It can be done. People can request these things and do it more of a grassroots organic effort. We're doing some of this stuff in Minnesota. Actually, right now, Jennifer DeJournette is doing some things in some different municipalities across Minnesota. We're going to be doing some stuff at a very local level in Arizona, in which it's a lot of grassroots. We're going to be helping them. We're going to be supporting them. But a lot of grassroots people have been asking, how can we do this by ourselves to make sure that it's being done relatively inexpensive? If you can get the bodies to do it with you, it's pretty inexpensive. So the how. So you've got the who, the absentee ballot request list, and it's the how. You know, I've got some of my staff. Dallas Woodhouse is my executive director in North Carolina. He's always voted by mail. So one of the things that he is telling people at these trainings across the state in North Carolina is, I vote by mail myself. I trust the system. I've been doing this for years. I've never had an incident. So you can actually trust that it will work because I've done it for multiple election cycles. For those that are doing this organically, you take your identified voter list, which is again the AB request list. And let's say in Wisconsin, we're using that as an example, 44,704 people, and you merge it with the current voter file. And then you realize, here are the people that have requested, here's the voter, here's the target. And then we're going to be looking at tagging these people that have made an AB request, and that's our chase list. Identify supporters who have a history of voting early or absentee. We've done that in Virginia. We're making sure that those people that have been identified in these 7 state Senate districts that we're working in as potential absentee ballot requests or early voting people are either requesting their ballot, and if they don't want to vote by absentee, that they are fully aware that September 22nd, early in-person voting starts. Here's the link that you have to go to find your early in-person person voting location. So we're going to be pushing these very targeted people in these districts as we also chase absentee ballots for those that we did not generate ballots for. So we're working on a whole series of things here in Virginia. Follow up with them repeatedly until you confirm they have voted. Again, going back to what is a chase? Absentee ballot chase is a series of targeted harassments. Peer-to-peer text, hey, have you been able to return your ballot? A couple days later, no, I haven't. Live call, hey, just following up, have you returned your ballot? No, I haven't. When early in-person voting starts is when you want to start doing door knocks. And so you send them to the door with 2 scripts. If you know that somebody's there and you go to the door and they have an absentee ballot that they haven't returned, that script goes, hey, we know you saw the ballot. Would it be possible for you to return it? And if it's in a state like Virginia, if you follow the laws and ballot security, would you be willing for me to take it in and turn it in for you? So you just keep harassing until people return their ballots. And once it's confirmed that they're voted, you remove them from the target list to refine your list to make it narrower so you can pursue those people who haven't turned their ballot in. So voter outreach program, what does it look like? You chase ballots when they drop. And again, it depends on the state when they drop. Ballots can drop around Labor Day. That's in North Carolina. It's literally a day or 2 after Labor Day, 60 days out from Election Day in North Carolina. You start hitting people with the peer-to-peer text, the live calls, the door knocks, mail, and you pursue all the way until mail-in voting deadline. And again, that varies by states. Again, Arizona, it's at 7 p.m. on Election Day. Florida, it's 3 days before Election Day. You keep on going until you hit that deadline on your chase. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Goal is no less than 80%. But in Florida, they aim for higher. They got to 81% in some of these elections. So every little bit counts. And they kept on pushing until the very last minute when it was the deadline and ballots had to be returned. And then at that point, the chase stopped. And then it became a 3-day election push into Election Day to get people to turn out to vote on Election Day. So, people have asked, what would be a phase? What would you say? Election Day, again, is November 5th, 2024. Phase 1, January, February, begin contacting loyal and occasional voters, remind them of, March primary, again, depends on the state. Encourage them to request absentee ballots for the rest of the year. Phase 2, spring, summer, during traditional phone bank and canvas time, offer to deliver absentee ballot requests to aligned voters, or as we're doing in Virginia, we're going with door hangers with a QR code. Are you interested in requesting an absentee ballot? I am. Hold up the door hanger. They can obviously do the QR code that takes them directly to the link to actually request a ballot. We're doing the same thing with our live calls, walking people through the process of how they request a ballot. Again, phase 3, get out the vote, can begin 60 days beforehand, like in North Carolina. when the absentee ballots are mailed, and they're likely hitting, I don't know, call it 50 to 55 days out from election day. And then you just start hitting people again, peer-to-peer text, live calls, doors, and mail. So we need to change our mentality, our entire approach on when get out the vote programs begin. As I mentioned earlier, it's no longer the vaunted 72-hour program. That world doesn't exist anymore. It begins the moment early voting starts, again, sometimes 60 days ahead of time. And I really want people to think about election season versus election day. And our focus has to be on our get out the vote efforts, our absentee ballot chase. All of these things begin the moment, the very instant that it begins at 7 a.m. on September 22nd here in Virginia. The chase begins. Our get out the vote efforts are beginning as well. And we'll go all the way until election day, until polls close, until ballot deadlines here in Virginia. There must be big get out the vote push, though, on election day. If conservatives are close going into election day, we win. Obviously, in a lot of different states, and again, depends on the state, but we win 70, 80% of election day voting in recent times. But if we're down by a massive margin, we can only make up so much ground on election day. But example, in Florida in 2020, Trump ended up winning by 3.5 points. He was down by 100,000 votes in the days leading up to election day. And of course, Republicans came storming to the polls on election day. The ballot chase kept it very, very close. And obviously they won overwhelmingly on election day. 3.5 points, which at that time in 2020 was considered a pretty significant margin of victory in Florida. And now DeSantis, I think, has taken it even further to the point where I think it's off the map. So, but the problem is, if we're not doing absentee ballot generation, voter registration, absentee ballot chase, we're still on first base on election day. If we haven't done everything that we should have been doing in regards to a chase program to bank our votes, Democrats are already rounding second with enough votes gathered through their ballot chase program. And I don't know about you, it's very rare for somebody starting at home plate to catch somebody who's already rounding second base. So we should stop doing it, because if we don't, we're going to see us losing a lot more in the future. So I've been alluding to Arizona, and this to me is one of those staggering examples of what went wrong in November of 2022. If we don't adjust our tactics, we'll continue to lose. We've lost too many winnable elections in the last few cycles. Arizona was one of them. Again, there's about 1,067,000 Republicans on a permanent ballot list in Arizona. Those were sent out in 2022, but only about 65% were returned. Now, if you'd gotten to 80% return, that'd have been about another 150,000 votes for Kari Lake, for Blake Masters, for Abe Hamadeh. Everybody else on the ballot would have won, and pretty definitively, actually. But when you only have 65% return, and in my mind left 150,000 votes out there because there was not a chase program implemented over the last 4 weeks in Arizona, there's first of all, there was a real problem, but two, that should give people hope. And this is one of my other messages. Can we win in the future? The numbers exist that show me that we can. The numbers exist already without doing any more voter registration. Even if we didn't do voter registration, even if we didn't do AB generation, the numbers exist if we will actually do the hard work. If we will put our hand to the plow, nose to the grindstone, and actually conduct some of these things and put the real time and money into it, you can actually win with the numbers that already exist. It would have carried Kari Lake, Blake Masters, all the Republicans down ticket across the ballot if you had gotten to 80%. In fact, 77%, as I alluded to earlier, did the math. 77% return on absentee ballots in Arizona, you would have won everything. So I think it's time to adapt or die. This is one of my messages to the grassroots. As American Majority, we've got offices in Arizona, Nevada, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Virginia, North Carolina. We train in all 50 states. It's adapt or die. And what are we prepared to do to actually change how we approach elections, election season versus election day, our tactics, our strategy, all of these things, so that we can actually be in a place to win moving forward. And I've been writing some rebuttal pieces. I write at amgreatness.com. American Greatness is where I write my pieces. There's been some exchanges, especially in the first 4 or 5 months of the year, between people that really don't like these ideas that I've just shared with you. And so there's been their piece. I've had rebuttal. We've gone back and forth. But in one of the pieces, a good buddy of mine and I that co-authored the piece, we made the point: the Declaration states that just powers are derived from the consent of the governed. The Declaration does not state, nor does the Constitution, just how that consent is to be secured, only that it must be secured. And I would argue with the current temperature of the regime, conservatives have no choice but to secure consent by all legal means. And right now, all the things that I've discussed, a lot of these things in a lot of different states are very legal. The state has decided so, courts have decided so. And for us not to use these tactics and these strategies that are legal and say we're, somehow we have principles, that's ridiculous in my mind. I think it's time that we actually adapt or die. And so this is what we are doing at American Majority Action right now. I have big plans for 2024 in regards to about 5 targeted presidential battleground states, in which I'm hoping that we will be able to secure the funding. Very good conversations going already to be able to do an absentee ballot generation and chase in some key states next year, in hopes that the presidential campaign, whoever that is, will do the same. RNC will do the same. That some of the statewides and congressionals in those states will also do the same. I think if we can all get on the same page, pushing in the right direction, that we can actually accomplish a lot of good things next year. But it's not going to happen if we simply wish for it or think about it. It's going to require some pretty hard work, some pretty labor-intensive stuff, and it's going to be extremely labor-intensive, call it over the last 6 to 4 weeks of the election in 2024. And it'll take some time and planning and some thinking going into those last 6 to 4 weeks to really be able to accomplish that. So my goal is that by summer of 2024, this becomes second nature to many on the right, that they understand this is what we have to do. There's no questions. There's no debates anymore. We will be doing this. We will do everything that we can to help either be a part of this or as a candidate actually implementing on a campaign so that we can have real success. Again, politics is policy. If you don't win politically, you're never going to get the right policy advanced. So I have compressed an hour presentation into about 39 minutes, and I will open it up for a few questions. So Lisa.
Yep. So Ned, we do have some questions in the chat.
Perfect.
That I will kind of read off to you.
Okay.
First off, one of the questions is, how do we know when a person has returned their ballot, and how can we take them off the list? The same person asked, in a primary, when registered voters, how do we know they vote and what candidate instead of another?
So again, there are some, it depends. You're not going to know. Like in Florida, for example, they know this Democratic ballot was returned, this Republican ballot was returned. They don't know who they voted for, but they have a pretty good idea, obviously, who they probably did vote for. In a lot of states, what we're doing here in Virginia, I'm working with some of my guys who are going to be pulling the ballot lists every day and uploading it into our system so that it refines our target list. And we use the Gravity software system for our targeting, but they're going to be doing that daily. So there are places, obviously you can do it from Secretary of State, although I have to tell you, there are some states that are not doing it daily. There are some states that have decided they're going to do it every, 3, 4, 5 days. Again, depends on the state. But you should be able to, and this is one of the things I think that the RNC should be working on. If I could offer some advice, is they should be making sure that every state, a lot of the key states next year, are doing very regular absentee ballot updates, should be daily, and it should be easily accessible so that you can identify again every day which people have returned their ballots and who hasn't.
Good, thanks, Ned. Now the next question is, does American Majority have an office in Las Vegas? I need to organize organizing grassroots, and the laws in Las Vegas are the worst.
We do. We actually have 2 full-time staff in Clark County, which is obviously Las Vegas. So we've got 2 full-time staff there. They are pushing ballot out, ballot in. And my hope is that we will be able to conduct a ballot chase in 2024, in November of 2024, leading into that in Clark County. There are about 111,000 Republican ballots and 88,000, I think it's the Independent American Conservative Party. So call it 200,000 ballots from conservatives in Clark County that were not returned in 2022. So I've made the argument, if you were to really focus an absentee ballot chase program on Clark County, Nevada, again, Las Vegas, I think you could see some pretty interesting and positive results next year.
Good, thanks. Now, the next question is the Arizona GOP planning to execute the recommendations in this presentation?
I hope so. But I have to tell you, I've been pretty open and honest about this. I will say it again. I am making, and I think it's a very safe assumption, that for whatever reason, whether it's funding, whether it's focus, whether it's determination to actually make this happen, I am assuming that certain entities will not be doing this. And so I and others are doing our best to raise the funds necessary to do a robust absentee ballot chase with maybe some generation in Arizona. You can do the math. If there's about 1.1 million Republican ballots in Arizona, and you want to say it's $10 to $12 per ballot collected, it's a robust budget that is necessary. I fully intend for us to be able to do that and make it happen, on the assumption that some people will not be doing what they should be doing. And if they do it, God bless, we'll have even greater success.
Okay, cool. Let's see what else we have here. What are Minnesota's absentee to in-person vote ratios, and what are some efforts happening in the impact that can help that?
So the highly specific question on data and details, that'd be a question for Jennifer DeJournette or Lonnie Leitner, my staff up in Minnesota, American Majority staff. So maybe Lisa, you can follow up with them and get those answers.
Yep, I will follow up with them.
I will say this, even though this is an off year in Minnesota, Jennifer, who's very persuasive, got me to okay some efforts in, I don't know how many municipalities, to do some absentee ballot chase in regards to city council, school board, county commission, that sort of level of race. And one of those, I know she got 30 volunteers, and they will be doing some ballot chasing in Minnesota in these local elections this fall. They've already started.
Yeah, I think that she's doing that in Bloomington. I think, I'm not sure.
Yeah. So
okay.
it's being done. It should be done. More should be done. And my hope is that we'll see what we can do in Minnesota next year. Obviously, there's probably a tier 1 list of states that I'm highly focused on, but I have made the argument there's a series of tier 2 states that should probably given some thought. Minnesota being one of them.
Now the next question, and we're going to have to stop with the questions pretty soon. Please clarify what you meant by absentee versus mail-in ballots.
Same thing. Absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, same thing. People ask, I want to have an absentee ballot mailed to me, sent to me. Someone is sending an absentee ballot. They fill out that form. They mail it back in. So hopefully I didn't confuse too many people, but people are mailed an absentee ballot. They fill out the ballot. They return it via mail, and they mail in the ballots for it to be counted, collected and counted.
And then kind of the last question, I think some of your staff is on and they're answering some of these questions, so that's wonderful. But what states are tier 1?
In my mind, and again, some people can quibble with me, but I've made the decision: Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Georgia, North Carolina, Clark County. So you could say Nevada, but it's really Clark County. Although I've also been making an argument, you might want to look at like New Hampshire in part of that tier 1. And those are the states. Obviously, you look at 2020, very narrow margins in Arizona, Wisconsin, Georgia. North Carolina should not be taken for granted. Obviously, Nevada was also another narrow margin state. I think it's very winnable. Adam Laxalt only lost by, I think, 9,000 votes last year. Lombardo won. You do it correctly, I think Nevada you could put into the red column next year. So those are kind of my tier 1. Some people would say, Pennsylvania is a beast. I hope somebody attends to Pennsylvania. That will be a very significant budget to do an absentee ballot chase in Pennsylvania. So people might have 1 or 2 states they would say, well, why not here? I've kind of made the decision based off some data, based off staffing, based off statistics, where I think I can get it. And those Arizona, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, or where I've come to the conclusion these are probably our best states that we can focus on and be effective.
Perfect. Okay, Ned, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. If you would stop sharing your screen so we can continue. And I would love to have you stay on, but feel free. I know you've got a lot of different opportunities to present, but we'd love to have you stay on if you can.
All right. I got a duck, but thank you, Lisa. And thanks everybody for joining and being a part of it.
Well, very good. Thank you very much, Ned. I really appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
All right. All right. Sounds good. Thank you.
You bet. So again, thank you all for coming, and I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to go through a little bit about Buzz 360. As I said very early in this presentation, we are a conservative tech company. We are headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And what you're seeing on your screen is really our all-in-one platform. And this is for candidates or party units, state parties, school board, but all these things. And this is the new one that we're very excited to talk about today, is data-driven action triggers for ballot chase. We also have a award-winning field app called Swipe Bread, which is relational organizing. And there's all kinds of different features. We're super proud of this. And we are an approved vendor by the RNC. So when we start talking about ballot growth, and Ned has just spent the last 45 minutes talking about it, which is great. But we really need to have a dynamic audience where we can build that infrastructure. Many of you had questions about where you can get the data. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. But to do outreach by using tags and party affiliation, voter histories, like Ned was talking about, a 1 out of 4 versus a 4 out of 4, and you build a trigger. Then we have persuasive voter outreach. So triggers of emails, text messaging, hosting neighborhood gatherings and invites, send friend-to-friend messages about early voting and why you should vote by mail, and the get out to vote persuasion. And then of course, the ballot chase. Once we get a message that you've requested the ballot, there's, send text messages, and Ned talked about this already. Text messages, send a friend-to-friend message to return their ballot. You can export that dynamic list and give it to people to run around the neighborhoods and collect their ballots from people, depending on your state. So this is a very quick graphic about how to build the ballot growth campaign. And in the Buzz 360 system, you're going to start out by setting up message templates with the appropriate audience and type. We'll set up the triggers for if a ballot is requested and a message once it goes out, once they've requested their ballots. Set up the triggers for when the ballot returns, and we can do it manually or automatically. Once we receive that data, that they've returned the ballot, we know that the ballot's been returned. So there's just some screenshots of the new features. We've not unveiled this yet. But we are getting messages. We are an approved vendor by the RNC. So right now you're going to see RNC data, and this is for Chesterfield County in Virginia. You set up these triggers, and once we get a message from the RNC data, it says, okay, they've requested their ballot. Once we get the message again that they've returned their ballot, it dynamically takes them off the list. So you're not putting people on and off the list. Down here, you'll see a little screenshot, and this is the history. So on Sunday, for Chesterfield County in Virginia, we saw ballots coming in. People were requesting ballots. There was 4,058 of them. Yesterday, 55 more came in that they had requested their ballots. They're going to start getting a message for the returning your ballots, and then we'll set those triggers to take them off the list. So again, and then what you're looking at right now is based on the RNC, but we can use other data as well. You can see here's an audience, and you can see that there's a tag that builds that dynamic audience so they're coming on and off as soon as we get those messages. The message type, you can have, as I mentioned earlier, this is one screen. It's really easy to do. You can do, the mobile app, broadcast email, broadcast text message. If you're approved by the carriers, it's all 10 DLC compliant, and you can have templates and all of those things. And now people can start sharing messages with their friends. Hey, did you ask 3 people to vote today? And again, our goal is once we receive that message that the ballot has been returned, we're going to remove the tag that was ballot requested, and we're going to add the tags that they've returned their ballot and send them a thank you. We want to automatically send them a thank you that you've crafted to send the vote, for sending their vote back in. They are now off the ballot growth journey in the Buzz 360 system. So again, this is my contact information. We'd love to hear more from you. We've started these series about 2 weeks ago. We had Kim Nunnenkamp, who is the executive director from Virginia, on talking about data modeling and targeting. He was a great resource to us. In October, we're having Eric Wilson, who is a dear friend of ours and an advisor. He is considered a digital expert in political fields, and he's going to be talking about AI and political. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to put them in the chat, and I would love to have you reach out to me.